I would like to introduce Professor Marty Kaplan, who is going to act as our guide today to try and find our way after this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, very much, and Jim and Fred. I really appreciate it. And thank you. This is an amazing turnout. I really, really appreciate it. Mike, yes, there, good, good, little sound. I'm honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be with you. I know that when it says peer-led learning, what that means is that you could just as easily be here, and I could be there learning from you. But when we get to the Q&A, please don't push that. So we're going to talk about Now What? The title was one we picked before the election. We figured it would make sense no matter what happens, and I think it probably does. I'm going to show you some video clips and some other stuff. If you've seen them, I hope that you'll enjoy seeing them again. I've tried to have some which are not everywhere, but I couldn't resist beginning with this one, which went viral on the internet and kind of summarizes for a lot of people what the experience of the campaign has been like.
That's why you're crying? Oh, it'll be over soon, Abby. Okay? The election will be over soon, okay? Okay. Oh.
So, what I'm going to talk about today, or try to talk about, are three things which are relevant to the past, in play now. They're not settled. In some ways, they're perennial. In some ways, they're dysfunctions that we're all going to have to deal with. I'm going to talk about the money, the truth, and the story. So, first, the money. You remember that famous Watergate expression, follow the money. And in this case, the amount of money we're following is $6 billion, which is the price tag of the election campaign and election we have just been through. The reason it got to be $6 billion includes the Supreme Court decision Citizens United, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which said that corporations are people and there are no restrictions on contributing to campaigns, and for all intents and purposes, it could be done anonymously, and also because there is, for all intents and purposes, no public financing anymore. It was Barack Obama in 2008 who turned down public financing, which to some degree led to the escalation of the money arms race. And there's also no federal election commission to speak of. It is a sort of half-vacant collection of warring partisan factions that has no authority and doesn't even attempt to exercise any authority. So effectively, there are no limits to the amounts of money which can be raised and spent in the election. That's where the $6 billion comes from. So what is $6 billion buying? Well, it's buying two things, basically. It's buying attention for the candidate's message, and it's buying an on-the-ground, get-out-the-vote apparatus. That's what it's paying for. I want to focus first on attention, the attention it's buying. If you're in a campaign, and I've lived through a few, you basically think about media, because you're not going to be in front of all the voters. You're going to be mediated. You think about media in two ways. There's paid media and free media. Paid media is ads. So you are spending tons of money not only producing the ads, but also getting them on the air. There's a complicated set of formulas that apply to how much things cost. If a campaign buys an ad, they're supposed to get the lowest unit cost available. If it's an outside group buying it, they can be extorted by the station to whatever amount they want to charge. Free media, or sometimes called earned media, is news. So you get your message out by buying it, and you can control it completely by what you put up there. And you get it out by having the news cover you. People in the news business don't like to hear that what they do is provide free media, hence the euphemism earned media. But for a campaign, basically, one way or another, it's face time, it's attention from the audience. So I'm going to show a couple of ads. They're one from each of the camps. Both of them were paid by independent groups. They're not official campaign ads. To me, they are extremely effective and memorable. And in fact, the first one I'm going to show you was an ad that was originally produced for the 2010 midterm elections. And it was so effective that they brought it back in rotation. So you may have seen it. Of course, California not being a battleground state, the only ads that we saw were ones in which there were national buys, usually on cable. So our experience of what the campaign was, what the ads were like, is quite different than if you were living in Ohio or Pennsylvania and so on. But this is an ad that sometimes showed up on cable. This is an ad, well, you'll figure out which side it's for.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支。 庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
America can determine our own future, but only if we own it. For American independence, we must cut spending and waste.
So when this ad ran, originally, a number of commentators pointed out a few things. One is that the things that in this story America did which caused America's downfall, namely spending on government stimulus, spending on a health program, and intervention in industries, those are the three elements of China's success that America is being criticized for and leading to its downfall. The other point often made was that, did you see the teeth on those people? They are Washington, D.C. area college kids. There is no one in that picture who grew up in China. So they found a great bunch of people to tell that story. So now here's an ad from the other side.
President Obama promised to begin to slow the rise of the oceans. And to heal the planet. My promise is to help you and your family.
Pretty powerful stuff. So that's what $6 billion is buying. And who gets it? Local TV station owners get that money. And most of the ads, if the campaigns or the independent groups get their way, air around local TV news during those segments. In many markets now, in a given channel, there may be 5, 6, 7 hours of local news a day, starting at 4:30 in the morning and ending at 11 or 11:30 at night. So there's lots of availabilities, and that's where they want to have their ads. But think about that for a second. If you own a local TV station, you essentially have a license to print money. Here's how the system works. Television stations broadcast using the electromagnetic spectrum, this invisible set of waves over which everything goes out. We, the public, own the electromagnetic spectrum, just as we own the mineral rights in national parks and the air and the oceans. So we, the people, through our laws, give away for free to individual entrepreneurs a license to use that spectrum in order to run a business. They don't pay a penny for it. All they have to do is get a license. When they get a license, they promise to serve the public interest. But in truth and in practice, the way you get to keep your license is that every 8 years you fill out a postcard, literally, and say, I'd like my license for another 8 years, please. And the answer from the Federal Communications Commission is always yes. So you have the license, you pay nothing for it, you don't have to do anything to keep it, and what you do with it is then sell our airspace to show ads back to us. And in many cases, to try to raise the money from us to pay them in order to convince us to do what someone else wants to do. It's a pretty good business. In this past campaign cycle, the top 10 affiliates of the 4 networks did so well, their profit went up 60% over 2010 because of the amount of money washing through the system. And they have a monopoly. You've got no choice. You've got to go to them. Les Moonves, the head of CBS, said, super PACs may be bad for America, but they're very good for CBS. Surprising candor, but completely true. So that's paid media. The paid media is going onto TV where the earned or free media is, local TV news. So what is on local TV news besides the ads? Well, it's an area that I have done some research in through the years. I'm going to show you the results of one of these studies. If you looked at, and God help you, don't do this, every single news program aired on every single station in the entire Los Angeles media market 24/7 for week after week, and you put all those hours together, you analyzed their content, and then figured out what a composite half hour of news would be like. What you discover is that most of it is stuff like ads, teasers and bumpers, those don't go away, come on back, that stuff, and then sports and weather. And once you've done all that, you've got less than half the show left. That's called the news hole. And so what's in the news hole? This is Los Angeles. I've done national studies, but this one in particular is the LA local media market. So I mentioned sports and weather. In a typical half hour, that's how much sports and weather takes up. Crime is the next big chunk, which is way out of proportion with the amount of crime and is the cause for what's called the mean world syndrome. It's what keeps people at home because they're afraid of what's going on outside their doors because that's what they see when they watch television. The ugliest dog contest. and other human interest stories take up that much. Well, you may note that we're kind of running out of time here. Entertainment, by which I don't mean the business of entertainment, an important Los Angeles story, but rather, what star is doing what to whom. The business and economy of Los Angeles, 29 seconds. Government of Los Angeles, 22 seconds. And by Los Angeles, I mean city and county. So within those 22 seconds, budget, law enforcement, education, layoffs, new ordinances, voting procedures, personnel changes, healthcare, transportation, and immigration. That's what gets covered in 22 seconds in a typical half hour of Los Angeles local news. So that's what they're showing. And then there are these ads, which you would think they would want to talk about in the news. Well, in fact, they don't. There was a study done during this cycle which covered Charlotte, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Milwaukee, and Tampa. 5 big markets and 5 swing states. And what they discovered was that in 4 out of 5 of those markets, all but Tampa, there was not one story which tried to verify or dispute the content of any ad that they were running. So in the one market, Tampa, where they did do that, there was one story under 3 minutes long. So that's the entirety of ad watches that were included in the news. On the other hand, there were 53 stories about Justin Bieber in the period studied. In Tampa, where they did have that one story, the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, they spent several $1 million airing an ad 150 times a month. This was an ad that one story was done and said it was false, but it didn't matter. They ran it. Although you might be interested to know that stations can turn down ads for falseness. Just no one does it. News is what's called now a pull medium. News used to be push. There used to be an editor, a publisher, a group of wise gatekeepers who said, this is what people should know. Here's a balanced diet of information. That's not how news is done anymore. News is now market-driven. It's what gets people to buy it, to pay attention to it, to be interested. That's why what I just showed you about the content of local news is true. That's what people want to see. That's what the stations believe. That's why they can get the ads and charge the money for them. But it's not just television, in case you were feeling a little superior. It also involves other media. A favorite recent example, right in the midst of the early worst days of the crisis in the EU, Time magazine had this cover in Europe, had this cover in Asia, had this cover in the South Pacific. Clearly they thought there would be an audience for this. It's very popular. They thought that would be a dog. There is a relationship between the news you consume and what you know. It may not be cause and effect, but you can, as the social science say, there's correlation. It's not causation. So you can do a quiz. You can go out into the field, social scientists have done this, and ask like 10 current events questions. Who is Vladimir Putin? A, B, C, or D? That sort of thing. Just very straightforward. What party controls the House of Representatives? And you can give this quiz, and then you can also ask the same people, what's your number one source for news? Where do you get your news? And then they can correlate that. It's a very interesting result. The national average score on that quiz was 35, And look where local TV news is, down the bottom. Local TV news, I have to tell you now, is the number one source for most Americans. And it has been for 40 years. It's declined slightly because of competition from the internet. But it is still, if you ask Americans where they get their news, they say local TV news. So that's what we've been talking about, and that's where people who do that get. At the top, in a fascinating result, The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, but lest you feel so good about yourselves, The O'Reilly Factor and Rush Limbaugh are up there. Arguably, even if you are in the bubble of those shows, you are hearing who Vladimir Putin is. So you can answer these questions, as opposed to if you're watching the network morning shows and local TV news, in which you would never hear Putin's name at all. So $6 billion goes into this media. How did it work out? How did the investment, what was the return on the investment of these $6 billion? Well, as we know, there was basically a standstill. The Democrats picked up a couple seats in the Senate, surprisingly, a few seats in the House. The president remained president. So in some ways, it was a kind of status quo election. But there were races all over the country, not just at the federal level, but the state level. And one of the most prominent investors in these races was Karl Rove. And so you might want to know, how did Karl Rove do in his investments? What was his ROI, his return on investment? So Karl Rove had two super PACs, American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS. So American Crossroads spent $105 million. And if you ask how many of the winners he backed based on the amount of money he put into the winners, or people he wanted to lose based on the amount of money he put in against them, how did it work out, Mr. Rove? He had a success rate of 1.29% with that $105 million. And his other PAC just broke 14%. Not a fantastic amount of success. It has led to talk subsequently that maybe the money spent on ads, which all of this was not such a good idea, and that instead it should be spent in future races on get out the vote, that having a ground operation is a really smart way to do it, not on ads. Well, not so fast, because of a strange fact about the way in which TV ad buying worked, not well known. If you are somebody who, on behalf of a candidate, puts ads on television, you get 5% of what it costs. So 5% of $6 billion is $300 million, which the community of super PACs, the people who did it, they are getting that skimmed off the top. So the chances that they're going to say, nah, we don't want to do any ads anymore, we're just going to go into get out the vote, there's a slight conflict of interest. So all this money is being spent because you need it to put these ads on. So where do you get the money? Well, you get the money from people who have the money, who turn out to be, in recent days, people who are independent billionaires, but also people who have lobbyists in Washington, big industries. So the dependence of Congress on the lobbying class, the givers, is complete. And it is the case on both sides of the aisle. Democrats have had just as much a romance with Wall Street and high-tech companies and so on as have Republicans. It's an equal opportunity system of legal bribery. And that's why they need the money, and there's the price, the strings that come from the money is the relationship with these industries, which, if you don't do what they want, are not going to give you your money, and what you're doing with it is buying ads, which the local stations are happy to take, even though they get this stuff for free from us. So just a little clip to illustrate how the money is raised. I want to show you very briefly a clip from a movie that I wrote and produced a long time ago, which sadly is still relevant. This is a scene at a Washington restaurant at which a brand new congressman who's just arrived in Washington, and by the way, that's where they are now. They're all in their freshman orientation. So this is during that period. A new congressman, played in this case by Eddie Murphy, who went to Washington because he realized he was a con man, small-time con man, and working at the edge of the law, and realized that, well, if he was in Washington, he didn't have to break the law. Everyone did this stuff. And so he's new, though, to the game, and he's been adopted by a powerful lobbyist and contributor played by Kevin McCarthy.
I'd like to do more money for you, but first I've got to get your positions on a few issues. Now, where are you on sugar price supports?
Sugar price supports? Where should I be, Terry?
Shit, it makes no difference to me. If you're for them, I got money for you from my sugar producers in Louisiana and Hawaii. If you're against them, I got money for you from the candy manufacturers.
You pick.
Let's say 4.
Yeah, 4.
How about putting limits on malpractice awards?
Well, you tell me.
Well, if you're for them, I got money from the doctors and insurance companies. If you're against them, I got money from the trial lawyers. Let's put you down as against.
Yeah, you know what? Put me down for against.
How about pizza?
Oh, no, this salad's gonna be enough for me.
Not for lunch, old buddy. For pack money.
You thought I was serious? He's fucking with you.
Well, you are.
Fucking with you. I'll pull. Terry, tell me something. With all this money coming in from both sides, how could anything possibly ever get done?
It doesn't. That's the genius of the system.
So, if you are of faint heart, just know that there are still some people nobly crusading to do something about it. The group that I find most promising is called Represent.us, and it is trying an interesting technique. You know about people making a pledge to Grover Norquist never to raise taxes? So what Represent.us is doing is trying to get 1 million people right now to sign a petition to say, you must pass campaign finance reform meaningfully in Washington, and that if you don't agree, if you don't sign the pledge to be for campaign finance reform, they will actively campaign against you in 2014. So it's a complete flip of what's going on now. So we've been talking about money. I want to move over now to the next piece of this, which I will call the epistemology election. Now, this is a very high-class group. You're called the PLATO Society, so I know a term like this would be familiar. For those of you who forgot, epistemology is how you know something, how knowledge exists. What is the way in which we decide that something is knowledge? How do you decide the difference between true and false? So, truth, you would think, would be a central principle of all aspects of life. We all care about the truth. However, we have moved into what Stephen Colbert calls the age of truthiness, or, in fact, the post-truth society is a term which has been used, and post-truth and postmodern, another familiar term, postmodern meaning there's no such thing as truth. There's your truth and my truth. I know it's not just everything's an opinion. Even what you thought of were facts are opinions. So we live in this post-truth society. Well, we have been seeing examples of that for a while. There are, for example, people who believe that their evolution is not a real thing. And they don't think that's an opinion. They think that's truth. We can think it's truthy. There are people who say climate change is a complete hoax. And there's no penalty for that except recently toward the end of the campaign, tragically. If you look at what has been going on in the campaign, for example, do you remember when the Bureau of Labor Statistics announced that unemployment had gone down? Do you remember the reaction of Jack Welch, who took to Twitter and put this tweet up? Unbelievable job numbers. These Chicago guys will do anything. Can't debate, so change the numbers. So he is saying that, well, it's not true because I say it's not true. The Congressional Research Service, a nonpartisan organ of Congress, was asked some time ago to do a research paper to investigate a very important question, which is, do tax cuts stimulate jobs? Do you get the growth that gets to jobs from tax cuts? After all, that's been part of our national economic religion for a while. Might be nice to know the answer. So on September 12th, the CRS put its report out, and it said, analysis of such data, this is like since 1945, suggests that the reduction in the top tax rates have had little association with saving, investment, or productivity growth. However, the top tax rate reductions appear to be associated with the increasing concentration of income at the top of the income distribution. Well, of course, what happened when this hit the internet on September 12th was that Mitch McConnell, the minority leader of the Senate, who has a say in part in what the Congressional Research Service does, said, no way, take that report off, we are not releasing it. And so it went, in fact, dark and was only made it online a couple of weeks ago because someone had a copy and they leaked the report to the text. So the facts don't matter. Do you know this guy? Nate Silver, So Nate Silver, for those of you who are not 538 junkies, turned out to be the best pollster, predictor in the entire campaign. And it's all because he's a really good numbers cruncher. He comes from the world of baseball statistics. And he applied that to politics and did brilliantly. He had every race in the country called except for one in North Dakota. He did really well. So as he's doing this, as the campaign is going on, and his number says Obama has a 60% chance of winning, 70% chance, 80, then down to 60, and then over 80. As it's happening, the Republicans are demoralized. So what do they do to deal with a prediction from a really reliable source that they're going to lose badly? It actually happened. There is a guy who started a site called Unskewed Polls. His name is Dean Chambers. And he said, basically, don't trust any of these polls. They're all skewed. They're all stooges for the Democrats. Trust our polls. And he basically just put out his set of numbers, which were much more appealing, and at the same time did this, which he thought would diminish Nate Silver's credibility. Amazing. He described Nate's... Have you noticed that Nate Silver is thin and effeminate? He wrote. He has a soft-sounding voice that sounds almost exactly like the Mr. New Castrati voice used by Rush Limbaugh on his program. So this was their way of dealing with truth. So you would think that journalism is the right way to intervene with something like this going on. Well, the problem with journalism is that, aside from the fact it's not making any money, that in the last 20 years or so, journalism has lost its nerve for saying what is true. Instead, journalism has become stenography. Journalists are told something and they write it down. And if they think they're going to be really responsible, they'll go to someone else and knowing that they'll get a counter to that, and they'll write that down too. And then, as they say on cable news, we'll have to leave it there. So that's what journalism has become in this era. A departure from that in this campaign cycle in particular, it began a couple cycles back, but it really crested in this cycle, is, wait a minute, that's not what we need. We need people to check facts and tell us what's true or not. And so a series of independent sites, sometimes connected with newspapers like The Fact Checker is part of the Washington Post, PolitiFact is part of a Florida newspaper, and so these groups have rated, fact-checked ads and awarded things like how many Pinocchios or a meter with pants on fire or not. So as they began to do this and were evaluating, like the ads in the campaign, those campaigns which were being dinged the hardest did not like that. So what they did was to set up their own sites, some liberal and some conservative. So you now can have a place to go to have a completely different fact check. They have gamed the system. They figured out how to deprive fact-checking as having the authority. They have made it a postmodern carnival. So the philosophy of this was first outlined by the philosopher Karl Rove, who actually, this was a quote that was not attributed, but then it was widely believed that he said it. He's talking to an author, Ron Susskind. Guys like me, he said to Susskind, were in what we Rove and my crowd, call the reality-based community, who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality, dripping with contempt. That's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality. And you, all of you, you journalists, will be left to just study what we do. Well, that was 2004. And in 2012, here is the chief pollster for Mitt Romney's campaign, Neil Newhouse, saying, fact checkers come to this with their own sets of thoughts and beliefs. We're not going to let our campaign be dictated by fact checkers. The fact checkers have jumped the shark. They've gone off the deep end. So that's the way in which this community has dealt with that. In this campaign, you have seen the results of that by looking at what the ads have done with impunity. Do you remember this? The You Didn't Build That campaign, which took a doctored a quote, I mean, the way the Kremlin might have done it, and had Obama saying something he didn't have, and it became a theme for the Republican convention. There was that ad. Do you remember the ad that Romney put out saying that Jeep is sending jobs to China, and even though the vice president of Chrysler and GM said you're full of it, he said, oh, no, it's true, and tried to parse the words so that it would be seen to true. Remember, Obama guts welfare reform completely disconnected from reality. No criticism by any fact checker made any difference. It just stayed on the air. This notion of an apology tour, which is was a drumbeat of the Romney campaign, even though there was no apology tour, it was said often enough that it had the status of fact. You remember the jobs creators, the notion that there is a class of people who, because they're really rich, are jobs creators, as opposed to, say, profit creators who are moving around pieces of paper. Or, do you remember the failed stimulus? Forget the fact that it stopped a certain number of jobs from being lost and ended up creating over 1 million jobs. The failed stimulus is what it became known as. Or the government takeover of health care became the common synonym for the Obama campaign. So as this is going on, it really broke my heart to see the New York Times at the beginning of this year run a story by its ombudsman saying, should the Times be a truth vigilante? As though acting as a check on those ads was some odd thing that maybe you shouldn't be doing. And I'm pleased to say that from January 12th until October 29th, suddenly there was a front page story about the Romney car ads, in which in the second paragraph it says, at times including statements that stretch or ignore the facts. That's as far as the New York Times has gotten, but it's a lot more encouraging than be a truth vigilante. And during debates, you will remember when Candy Crowley said about not calling Benghazi terrorist incident, well, yes, actually he did, sir. And Martha Raddatz, when she asked a question, be specific, and there was no specificity, she said, oh, okay, you're not being specific. So there's been an attempt to push back that we've seen recently, my favorite of which is the front cover of a noted communist publication, Bloomberg Business Week, in which they took a stand. So, third topic. We've talked about money and we've talked about truth. Now let's talk just briefly about stories. Campaigns are about stories. Every successful campaign has a story about itself and a story about the opponent that it tells. And if you don't tell a story, you're out of luck, because then you're just sort of hammering away at lists and stuff. But if you can create a story, once upon a time America was like this, and then we became like this, and now we have to go like this. And then there's that person over there, and he wants to do that, but we're not going to go there, we're going to go here. Unless you fill in those details, you're not going to be successful. And so there's a battle between different stories. Now, a story is different from history. History, in principle, is people trying their very best to put facts together and say what history's story is. But the story is not that. Stories are what have been called narratives. A narrative is a made-up tale which we take to be true because it's convincing. Our brains are amazing. And one of the last things they are is logical or rational. We are emotional creatures, and we respond to enchantment. There's a wonderful book I highly recommend called Thinking Fast and Slow by a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who he won for economics. And it's about literally how our brains work. And he explains to us that we may think that the thing our brains are good for is figuring out what's true or not, and that's not the case. That part of our brain is really slow and clumsy. What we're really good at is taking in stories. So what narratives are we now dealing with in the wake of this election? What did the election mean? Now what? Well, some of the explanations for what the election means have to do with demographics. Demographics are destiny. And interestingly, Maureen Dowd called Mitt Romney the president of white men. Well, interestingly, if you go back to 1976 and look at the white vote as a share of the electorate, it has been declining all through that period pretty much. So that this is not something brand new. This has been a part of America. At the same time, those who are voting are different from the white electorate of the past. Two interesting books about that. John Judish and a demographer named Rui Teixeira in 2004 wrote something called The Emerging Democratic Majority, which in 2004, of course, was not a successful year for Democrats. And to have said that is somewhat prescient. And they really did predict all the things that we're talking about now in terms of the participation of blacks and Latinos and so on. Another influential book which people have rediscovered by Jim Bishop is called The Big Sort, in which he points out that we are all living in enclaves. We want to be with people like us. We're more comfortable that way. So if you look at these maps of how the election turned out, what you won't see is, salt and pepper of all kinds of people in all kinds of places. We really cluster. We cluster in counties, in states, in neighborhoods, and in blocks. And as his subtitle put it, why the clustering of like-minded America is tearing us apart. So those forces these are narratives. These are stories. They're telling us, oh, this is happening. Here's what it's doing to America. I don't know if you saw the paper this morning or heard on television, but Mitt Romney was heard from for the first time. He was on a conference call with some donors. It's not exactly clear, but it was since the election, and he was explaining the loss. What he did not know was that there was a reporter on the line from the Los Angeles Times recording this. And so this is the lead story in this morning's paper, and it's all over the news. And so why did Romney lose? What story is he telling? Gifts Obama gave minorities. So that student loans are gifts to people. And what the Times, God bless it, said right at the top of the story was, wait a minute, Obama didn't just win in states with a lot of minorities. And Obama's own tax plan gave gifts. They just gave gifts to people who were really wealthy. So the story is not holding up, but it is his story. He's sticking to it. And I was fascinated to see that the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, a prominent Republican who was once thought to be a contender for the nomination, instantly said today that Romney is completely wrong. That's nuts. It has nothing to do with why he lost. So the fractionization of the Republican Party is happening over this issue in front of our eyes. Middle of the country, the people who are independent or moderate or uncommitted were courted assiduously by both candidates, and all the polling suggested that what they were most interested in was a president who would break the gridlock, stop the bickering, be bipartisan, or as some people said about Obama when he first was elected, be post-partisan, compromise, find common ground. So that's a story. So you've got these two warring factions, and they're going to decide to stop that and come together and find common ground. So how realistic is that, or can you game that system? Well, look at the statement that Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, issued on the night of the election when it was clear that Romney won. He said to Obama, move to the center. Republicans will be there to meet you halfway. And then, this is his graciousness, the American people preserved Republican control of the House. The voters have not endorsed the failures or excesses of the president's first term. They've simply given him more time to finish the job they asked him to do, together with a Congress that restored balance to Washington after 2 years of one-party control. So this is your partner in bipartisanship. This is also the man who has been in charge of the filibuster. It used to be that the filibuster, which is the thing that you do if you want to stop something dead in its tracks in the Senate, and the minority can do this because it's hard to muster the 60 votes you need to stop it. It used to be 66, but they changed that in the 70s. So here is what happened. The filibusters were that uncommon Then they changed the rules from 66 down to 60 down there in the 70s. And then it began to increase. And then look what happened under Mitch McConnell. The filibuster is routine. Nothing gets passed. Nothing. Nothing even gets to be voted on because of the filibuster. And this is your partner in bipartisanship. How do you find the middle? Where is the middle in that relationship? That story is now what we're struggling about. Obama was asked what his mandate was at his press conference yesterday. He said, I have one clear mandate, and that's to help the folks in the middle or people who are struggling to get into the middle. Well, at the same time as that's what he says his mandate is, in Washington, in the conventional wisdom of inside the Beltway, or what's sometimes called the Gang of 500, these are the things which are most important. The short-term deficit, not dealing with jobs and saying that in a time of economic distress, you should not think about the short-term deficit. You should stimulate the economy, the Paul Krugman argument. Instead, the short-term deficit is what we must deal with. It's a crisis. The fiscal cliff, which was named by Ben Bernanke and stuck as though it were something that is out there, like a force of nature, as opposed to something being engineered by a Congress which couldn't figure out how to stop what they were doing, and so they took loaded guns to their head and said, well, we'll fire them if we can't do this stuff, and they couldn't do this stuff, and now they're trying to figure out how to unpull the trigger. The sequester of funds in a brutal sledgehammer way, both from the defense budget and from the discretionary budget, is the way of dealing with the fiscal cliff, which is absolutely nuts, but that's now the deadline. Simpson-Bowles, this plan to deal with the deficit, has suddenly assumed the status of the wisest thing there could be, whereas in fact the Simpson-Bowles Commission itself rejected the Simpson-Bowles plan, including Paul Ryan, who voted against it, although he campaigned on it. He was on the commission. And if you look at what the Simpson-Bowles Commission recommended, for example, it recommended raising the Social Security retirement age, even though its charge had nothing to do with Social Security. They had Medicare in it, but not Social Security. And they said, oh no, great opportunity. Let's just go after that. And so this is now conventional wisdom. Simpson-Bowles, raise a Social Security rate, which has no impact on the deficit. Austerity, European-style austerity, which is not so far producing the kinds of results that one wants. These countries are cutting way back. There's social unrest. And what they should be doing is figuring out how to grow so they can have some income and recover. Instead, they're just cutting deeper and deeper. And this notion of a grand bargain, which we're now going to watch the sort of either the suicide in slow motion or progress toward the Messiah. Also in today's paper, the LA Times had a good day today. Another front page story. A story, a narrative. If you ask Californians, how should we deal with the fiscal cliff? What they say, I love this summary, Americans have one firm word for their elected officials, compromise, but by that they mean make the other side compromise. And so if you ask Californians, should we raise taxes? Well, it's about even, but mainly no. Don't raise taxes. Should you raise taxes on people making more than $250 a year? Yeah, by 2 to 1, absolutely. Should we cut defense by $600 billion? Just about split. Cut non-defense also by $600 billion, which is what the sequester does, like education and health care? No way. 70 to 25. Reduce Medicare and Social Security, also part of Simpson-Bowles. 82 to 16. So that's what people say, and they're telling their leaders. I'm going to end on just a couple of stories moving forward stories not by me, but by people in parties and in the media, just to kind of summarize what's being pushed out there. This appeared, I think, 24 hours after Obama was elected, and it comes from the advocacy arm of the Heritage Foundation, which is a faux think tank in Washington. And
the choice you face won't just be between two candidates or two parties. It will be a choice between two different paths for America.
President Obama's re-election is a devastating blow, but it's not a decisive defeat. Over the next 4 years, he will seek to fully implement Obamacare, continue exploding federal spending, to hollow out our nation's military, and seek to impose a cap-and-tax scheme upon our nation's economy. We are in a war. We're in a war to save this nation, and abandoning our post will condemn it to a future of managed decline. Over the last 4 years, the conservative movement has grown stronger as more and more Americans recognize the bankruptcy of President Obama's vision.
Dow dropped nearly 1,000
Misguided policies and ideology.
higher.
Interest is running at $9 billion a week.
No experience of business or you.
President Obama believes that we can spend our way to prosperity that condemns future generations to becoming drowned in debt. He thinks that 15 bureaucrats in Washington should be able to make decisions about our health care and can choose winners and losers in the economy. You and I understand that should be left to entrepreneurs and the free market. To win this war, we must remain committed to fighting President Obama's agenda. We will work with our friends in Congress to remain true to our conservative principles. In 2014, there will be 20 Senate liberals up for re-election. A strong, constitutionally conservative Senate is critical for this fight. And in 2016, with a deep bench of committed conservatives, we must choose a nominee who can best articulate our shared conservative values. Heritage Action is committed to this fight. We will take the fight for freedom to the halls of Congress, to congressional districts, and to town halls across America. Thank you for what you've done. And more importantly, I ask you to remain involved as we roll up our sleeves and continue the hard work of rebuilding this great nation.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
I love that scary music. Well, so bipartisanship, there it is. And now from someone who is ideologically elsewhere, this is a clip, I was going to show you a longer version, but I trimmed it, from Rachel Maddow on the day after the election. She first went, the piece I've trimmed is what we've been talking about. She said things like, tax cuts do not create jobs. Global warming is not a hoax. The kinds of stuff that we've been talking about. And then having run through all that stuff, she then makes, I think, a very interesting point, which is also about this, what story are we telling? What's happening with us now? Where are we in this narrative?
Listen, last night was a good night for liberals and for Democrats for very obvious reasons. But it was also possibly a good night for this country as a whole. Because in this country, we have a two-party system in government. And the idea is supposed to be that the two sides both come up with ways to confront and fix the real problems facing our country. They both propose possible solutions to our real problems. And we debate between those possible solutions. And by the process of debate, we pick the best idea. That competition between good ideas from both sides about real problems in the real country should result in our country having better choices, better options than if only one side is really working on the hard stuff. And if the Republican Party and the conservative movement and the conservative media is stuck in a vacuum-sealed, door-locked spin cycle of telling each other what makes them feel good and denying the factual lived truth of the world, then we are all deprived as a nation of the constructive debate between competing, feasible ideas about real problems. Last night, the Republicans got shellacked, and they had no idea it was coming. And we saw them in real time, in a real humiliating time, not believe it even as it was happening to them. And unless they are going to secede, They're going to have to pop the factual bubble they have been so happy living inside if they do not want to get shellacked again. And that will be a painful process for them, I'm sure, but it will be good for the whole country, left, right, and center. You guys, we're counting on you. Wake up. There's real problems in the world. There are real knowable facts in the world. Let's accept those and talk about how we might approach our problems differently. Let's move on from there. If the Republican Party and the conservative movement and conservative media are forced to do that by the humiliation they were dealt last night, we will all be better off as a nation. And in that spirit, congratulations, everybody. Big night.
So I'm going to leave you on a laugh, I hope. This is, in some ways, a summary of everything that I have talked about, and you will not be shocked that it is probably from our most senior political scientists.
For the most part, the news networks acquitted themselves nicely, with little of the early call controversies and holodeck malfunctions of years past, excepting, of course, BMN, Bull Mountain News, whose denizens were caught flat-footed by an historic storm that, despite all the evidence, just days before, they never saw coming.
I think Mitt Romney is going to win the election.
It just is a momentum.
I think that Mitt Romney will win.
We're going to win by a landslide.
The polls are skewed.
You can go through all the scientific gobbledygook you like. I don't believe them.
Yes, this was the historic 2012 election between scientific gobbledygook, or as we call it, arithmetic, and belief. And belief wasn't going down without a fight, which led to what I'm about to show you. Now, my friends, eventually someday I will die, as will you, and everyone you've ever known and loved. But this 5-minute segment from last night's Fox News election coverage, taken at the precise moment that their own in-house election return research squad announced that Ohio, and thus the presidency, would be awarded to Barack Obama, I believe this piece of footage will, unlike us, live forever.
Do you believe that Ohio has been settled?
No, I don't. And look, if we are calling this on the basis of 74% of the vote being in, and when 77% is in, Secretary of State website, I got the director of the Ohio campaign for Romney on the other end of the line, refreshing the page every few seconds.
Go on.
It's going to be a Republican victory. This is a historic Republican county. Their target is 64. They're at 59 with basically the early vote counted. It's going to continue to edge up. Big swatches of Butler County, Delaware County, and Warren County, all of which are Republican counties that have big chunks of their vote out.
Is this just math that you do as a Republican to make yourself feel better, or is this real?
Well, did you catch that? That was it. That was the moment. Did you see it? Did you record it? Did your team know it? Because you can play it backwards and forwards all day long like I did today. Here's what happened. I just want to get it straight, Carl, very quickly. Are you lying to yourself? Or to the millions of viewers? 'Cause you're lying. By the way, math you do as a Republican to make yourself feel better is a much better slogan for Fox than the one they have now. But you know, delicious. Like when Truman Burbank first suspected that the world he'd been living in was not what it seemed, Discovery would take a voyage.
Karl Rove said that we should figure out what the deal is with this decision desk. The decision desk is in a different place. Megan, I will escort you down the steps here. Megan is going to go to the decision desk and interview them about the decision on Ohio.
It was then that Megyn Kelly, in pursuit of something called facts, left the holodeck and entered the world of Dunder Mifflin.
What we're saying is that the amount of raw vote that's in these counties that's out there still waiting to come in is so large, no matter what the handful of Republican precincts that are still out there are, it's just not going to make it.
Percent certainty.
99.95%. So you're saying there's a chance? Yes! Last night, tragically, there was an avalanche on Bull Mountain, ladies and gentlemen. Would the blame for it go to their own willful blindness? Their eager supping of a misinformation gruel they themselves cooked up and had to, at some deep level of cognition, know contained far more than the FDA allowance of bull?
The white establishment is now the minority.
I just cannot believe, though, that the majority of Americans would believe that incurring more debt is good for our economy, for our children's future, for job creators.
It's not a traditional America anymore. And there are 50% of the voting public who want stuff.
I cannot believe that the majority of Americans would believe that it's okay not to follow the Constitution and not have a budget.
Who is going to give them things? President Obama. People feel that they are entitled to things.
Holy balls. What an incredible story to tell yourselves. We would have won if it weren't for the moral failings of the non-real America. It's white people judo, honkudo. Fox lost because last night minorities who feel entitled to things came and took the country away from the self-sufficient white Medicare retirees and upper-class tax avoidance experts, or as they're also known, your audience. We'll be right back.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. You can tell how much we enjoyed it by the fact that almost everybody is still here, and that is really unusual for our group. So, thank you.